Thank you. Appreciate that. Welcome, everyone, to the end of week 3 of our Virtual Learning Institute. We have one more week after this. We're ending this week with a great topic, turnover in state vocational rehabilitation agencies, insights and trends. Today, our presenters are Melanie Poe and Dr. Trenton Landon. Um, they're coming to us from Utah. We're so glad that they're here to share this research and information. Melanie Poe is a doctoral student in the Disability Disciplines, Rehabilitation Counseling and Supervision, Department of Special Education and Rehabilitation Counseling at Utah State University. Her professional background includes work as a vocational rehabilitation counselor, guardian ad litem in Superior Court, and advocate for children and families navigating complex legal and service systems. Her research centers on workforce retention in state vocational rehabilitation agencies with a particular focus on the interplay between counselor identity, organizational context, and long-term sustainability in the field. She is especially interested in how systems can better support practitioners serving individuals with disabilities across the lifespan, including youth involved in foster care and transition services. Dr. Trenton Landon is an associate professor in the Department of Special Education and Rehabilitation Counseling at Utah State University. He completed his master's degree in rehabilitation counseling at USU in 2005 and worked for state VR agency until 2012. He then completed his PhD studies at Michigan State, and he wears that proudly in rehabilitation counseling education in 2016. Dr. Landon has been certified as a rehabilitation counselor since 2005 and presently serves clients with chronic illnesses and disabilities in a campus-based mental health clinic. He has been at Utah State since the fall of 2016, and his primary areas of research focus on clinical supervision, professional identity, and clinical skill development, ethics, rural rehabilitation services delivery. And we welcome both of you. Thank you. And just a quick housekeeping, just a reminder, keep mics off. If you do have questions, please jot them in the chat box. Our presenters will be watching that and answering as the presentation goes on. And just a reminder to make sure you sign in. And with that, I turn over the floor to our presenters.
Thank you, Christine, and thank you, Vicki, and thank you to my advisor, Dr. Trent Landon, for giving me this opportunity. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for being here today. My name is Melanie Poe, alongside Trent Landon, Dr. Trent Landon, and we're excited to share findings from our study examining within state vocational rehabilitation systems. Much of the literature in VR has focused on why counselors leave, and we wanted to ask a different question. Why do counselors stay? Today, we'll walk through prior turnover literature, discuss the rationale for this project, but we'll also explain our qualitative appreciative inquiry methodology and share 6 themes that emerge from counselors who continue to remain in the state VR practice. And again, the common question maybe thinking about is why do counselors stay? That question is the emotional anchor of this whole presentation. Let's see here. Okay, so for today, just an introduction, and Christine already did such an amazing job. We're going to do a little bit of an introduction. We're going to talk about the prior research, the current study and analysis, and recommendations, i.e. potential solutions. So a little bit about me. I get called Melanie if I'm in trouble, prefer Mel, and 3rd-year doc student. I'm from Ferndale, Washington. I don't know if anybody is familiar with Ferndale, but it's an hour and a half north of Seattle and about 15 minutes away from the Peace Arch crossing to get into Canada. I worked for VR in Washington State before I came to USU, and my research interests, again, very well outlined by Christine, are advocacy and policy regarding serving transition-age youth. And then Dr. Landon, if you would like to introduce yourself quickly or not quickly.
I think quickly is better than not quickly. I don't know that I'll add much to what was already said, but one of the things that hopefully we bring is a perspective on state VR, on the state VR system, state federal vocational rehabilitation system. But I hope as we talk today, there's an element of yes, we'll potentially critique that system a little bit, but I hope it doesn't come across as negative, but just kind of program evaluation. How can we improve? Because as was mentioned, we both have work experience and years of experience working in the state VR system. I think highly of it. I like when my students go and work there and try to recruit them to go that way. I think it's a system and an agency, more or less, an agency that really does serve a specific need. So as we're talking about the state VR system today, and yes, we're talking, it was framed by Christine, Dr. Sacco Benny, as a great topic. I don't know if it's a great topic because we will talk about some of the negative aspects of it, but hopefully that we're framing today's conversation at least from more of as was mentioned, an appreciative inquiry approach. We'll talk a little bit later about why that we felt that was important. But we do, yes, we'll be a little bit negative, especially at the beginning as we talk about prior literature, but hopefully there's a positive spin on this and a positive take-home message. Next slide. And so I will be using Melanie's in charge. I told her this is her project, so she gets to be the lead presenter, and so she's running it from her computer, and I'll say the next slide thing is to kind of transition. Now, a couple things, and we will make our slides available as also we kind of used artificial intelligence, AI, because that's the fad right now, to kind of synthesize some stuff. And so we have some practice briefs that we'll include with it as well that really do provide a good summary of a lot of the research that's out there. And so I'm actually also going to talk a little bit about the problem. I think there's 7 studies that I'll draw from in particular. And I do have a slide for each one of those studies, but I'm going to jump over that. Those are more for your benefit if you want them down the road. It clarifies a little bit more, but I don't know that we need to go into that level of detail. But a few things that we do want to start. This is a problem that's been around for a while. And as you look at some of the research and the designation of turnover in state VR as a problem, it goes all the way back to the late 1980s. And when you start looking at some of the studies that have been done and the way they were framing it, a disease with solutions, um, it's been around and it's something that we've been talking about. I'm going to talk about kind of the last 20 years of research, but it's really been around for really going on 40 years now. So there's a supply issue and a demand issue. That's one side. And then there's a turnover and retention issue. So it's part of the same problem. Cogs going into the machine and cogs coming out of the machine at the same time. And yet we need to have more going into the system than coming out of the system. But we won't really focus too much on supply and demand. We're going to focus more on turnover and retention. But the reality is, as time has progressed and we have graduates of rehabilitation counseling programs across the nation, there's now more employment opportunities than there's ever been. I think, in my opinion, for rehabilitation counselors that are certified, there's licensure options, and so there's more mental health focus. There's just a lot more competing employment settings than what we saw in the past. And while we still see numbers of about 30% of graduates of rehabilitation counseling programs going into the state VR system, and I think as a standalone system, it's one of our employers, it's still one of the biggest, takes up the largest percentage of graduates. We're just seeing 70% of our graduates now go somewhere else. Could be in the Veterans Administration, could be in psychiatric rehabilitation, psychiatric hospitals, private practice, growing more and more and more, insurance companies hiring certified rehab counselors more and more and more, and pay tends to be better in some of these areas. And so as a graduate is now coming out of their program and they're looking at their opportunities, there's a lot of opportunities, a lot of different practice settings, work settings, and some of those may be more appealing just based off of what they're able to market and what they're able to provide. So there's the input, and we can't graduate enough people to fill those positions. We're also seeing a decline in the number of rehabilitation counseling programs due to accreditation concerns, just general closing of programs for political reasons at the universities. There's a tend to, I call it at least at Utah State, we reference it. It's probably not very accurate, at least in terms of uh, a well-coined phrase. I do think it's accurate in terms of what's happening. There's more of that butts in seats model, and universities are really looking at how many students do you have, how many student credit hours are you producing, and for a lot of rehab counseling programs that may or may not, that more than likely don't have an undergraduate program with hundreds and thousands of undergrads, it's getting harder and harder to sustain. And so there are some programs closing for these reasons as well. But then we get into turnover, and that's what we want to talk about today. When you start thinking about the health of an agency, the health of an organization, an employer, and you start talking about turnover on an annual basis of 20%, it's not the greatest indicator of health. It might even be an indicator of a lack of health as far as the organization is concerned. And in one study that is relatively recent, 2024, the participants were asked to talk about what's their likelihood of being employed in a state VR agency in the next 5 years. 50% said, I'll probably be looking somewhere else. And so when you start thinking about people with less than 5 years of experience, and half of those folks, maybe they received a rehab service administration scholarship, and so they were supported with RSA funds. But once they complete that payback, it seems like, based on the numbers, they're starting to look somewhere else. I've completed my payback obligation, and now I have opportunities to go somewhere else. So there's a strain on the system, both in terms of what's coming in and what's going out. Yeah, and so sometimes, Vicky, as we pointed out here in the chat, Bowling Green closed their programs a few years ago. Sometimes there's a very influential professor in a program, they're keeping it going, but when they retire, it gets closed. I saw that at the University of Southern Maine as well. When Dr. Charlie Bernaccio retired, their program went away. And so it does happen for sure. But what we're seeing then is there's not enough people going into the system, and there's people leaving the system quite quickly after their hire. Their work tenure is not that long, and so those left in the state VR system that are working, there's strain. There's strain because of vacancies that are not being filled, and so if I'm still there, I'm expected to do more, potentially cover 2 caseloads, and that strain is problematic. Mel, next slide if you would. Now, so what's the problem with constant personnel turnover? A couple of things. One, it's just expensive. When you start thinking about onboarding and replacing and all of these things, there's a cost associated with it. So there is a financial cost that comes with it. There's a couple other things as well in terms of when you start looking at parallel fields, there's a decreased fidelity to treatment plans. And so when you start thinking about that individual plan for employment, and there's a different counselor coming and going, it's going to be really hard for that person, that consumer, that client that consumer of services, that client to really feel like they're being served. There's lowered client satisfaction rates. I'm constantly meeting a new counselor. I don't like this. I'd like a single point of contact, and I'd like that point of contact to remain over time. It impacts the working alliance as well, and we know that's very important to working to outcomes. Uh, and then just clinical decline in clients generally. If they feel like they can't rely on the person that's serving them, there is a little bit of a mental health aspect that's impacted as well. Next slide. So why are they leaving? Kind of broke it down, at least in terms of 3 ways. And this is one of those infographics we have. Stress, occupational stress. There's large caseloads. There's role conflict, the idea that I'm not doing the job I envisioned for myself. When I was trained in my educational program, I thought I'd be doing this. Now I'm in the work setting, and this is nothing like what I was trained for. That causes stress. Paperwork, especially as I talk to friends and colleagues that are working in the state VR system now. My experience is pre-WIOA, so pre-2014. And as a result, I don't know what, all I hear from them is the increase in paperwork and that administrative burden. That's creating stress, and stress leads to turnover. Compensation that lags credentials and expertise. When you start talking, and I recognize there were changes to this with 2014 Workforce Investment and Opportunity Act as well, where people who did not have a bachelor's degree could get hired. But when I start looking around, I have a master's degree, I have credentials, and I'm considering what I'm getting paid, and I'm comparing that to other fields or comparable fields or other practice settings, and it's sometimes $10,000 to $15,000 less. I might start thinking about leaving. And a master's degree that pays somewhere around 40,000 a year is enticing me to go somewhere else. Now we have seen wages increase over time, and I recognize that that's not always something that agencies can control due to government funding, but it is a concern, especially when we say especially when I, as an academic, and research suggests that a master's degree is the preferred qualification as well as certification as a certified rehabilitation counselor. So if they have those credentials, it's easily to go somewhere else, and we'll see occupational drift. They'll drift into other comparable fields. Then limited advancement, professional development, and supervision. If I don't feel like I have opportunities for promotion, and I feel like the supervision that I'm being provided is largely administrative in nature, it's very agency driven, I get disaffected and disinterested in the work setting, dissatisfied in the work setting very quickly. If I don't have opportunities for professional development, there's a lack of newness, a lack of challenge that can be problematic. Dr. Marion Diamond, one of the leading researchers on neuroscience and the brain, coming through the 70s and 80s, did some fascinating research. And if you want to keep people interested and really healthy from a brain standpoint, newness and challenge are part of that healthy brain. And so if I feel like I'm in my work setting and I'm not being challenged, there's limited opportunities for advancement. There's nothing new about it. It's the same thing. Uh, then I'm probably going to be disaffected and start looking somewhere else. Mel? Now, here's just kind of a summary of the last, like I said, it started in the late 80s and all the way up until the present. We're still figuring it out. And it's like a puzzle. We're finding more and more pieces to the puzzle all the time. And hopefully today we're just adding one more piece to that puzzle. But in 1986, Dr. Commando and his colleagues, it was actually more with rehab facilities, so community rehab programs, not necessarily state VR, but this is when they first started looking at those, and community rehab programs in 1986 reported a 23% turnover. And then 1997, turnover continues to be a dilemma for rehab counselors, or excuse me, rehab agencies. 2004, occupational stress and how it affects turnover intentions. And it's the stress itself. It's not the resiliency of the counselor. More often than not, they're able to put up with quite a bit, and they do for quite a long time. And then eventually it just becomes too much. And so the stress, that constant stress and that occupational stress leads to turnover. In 2008, Armstrong and colleagues really looked at job satisfaction and its relationship to turnover and what was happening. In 2013, Dr. Pitt was looking at the idea of person and organizational fit, really with career theory and looking at it for that way, and found that there was a need for promotion opportunities and better supervision. In 2021, Dr. Herbert, who's been working on this for a while, really looked at predictors of intent to leave. And in 2023, it looked at recruitment and retention. Again, that those two sides of the same coin. In 2024, I had the opportunity to work with some colleagues, and we looked at it from a professional identity standpoint. If I've been trained as a rehabilitation counselor, if I've been certified as a rehabilitation counselor, if I'm active in a professional association such as ARCA, how does that impact my turnover intent? And there was some really interesting findings there. And those with a strong professional identity were less likely to leave the state VR agency. And then in 2025, Dr. Scott Sabella looked at the impact. People had been talking about supervision in most of these studies in some way, shape, or form, and the need for supervision. And he was able to really clarify the difference, the impact of clinical supervision versus administrative supervision. And at least in terms of the model and the regression, the statistics that were run with his study, if you want to decrease turnover intent in an individual by about 20%, you need to be focusing more on clinical supervision and less on administrative supervision. So there is some really good stuff, but all of these were really focused on why folks are leaving and kind of that deficit. What makes them go away? And looking for a solution from that standpoint. What makes them go away? Why are they having low rates of job satisfaction? Why are they leaving? Now we're going to jump ahead, and like I said, there's some slides on each of these that kind of go into each of those studies a little bit more with a little bit more detail. So if you're interested in those, you can take a look at it. But we're going to jump ahead because we want to spend a little bit more time and want to give that time to talking about the current study that really frames it for more about why do they stay, more of that positive approach. So go ahead and jump to your slides, Mel, and we'll start there.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Landon. Okay, so this current study, the rationale behind it, rather than asking why are counselors leaving, we asked what helps counselors remain committed to this work over time. And right when I moved to Utah, Dr. Landon and I were talking about this, and he said, we're going to do an appreciative study. Oh, I didn't know. What does that mean? Appreciative study. Well, where everything's positive. We're going to frame everything positive, and not only what I conveying it in a positive tone, but it was almost kind of, especially coming out of the pandemic and there being such a high rate of turnover, and for me being in Washington State where we had a new software that people really disliked, and that was really creating a lot of issues. It was a way that counselors would talk to us because there was no more room, it seemed, from my perspective, for negativity. So the whole appreciative lens that shifted for the appreciative inquiry. It was a strength-based orientation. So we wanted to talk about VR workforce instability, burnout. Yes, turnover remains persistent. Even my former supervisor said, "Gosh, we're really having a hard time. I don't know if anybody's going to really want to talk about why people leave. Well, why do people stay?" And that shifted a lot of perspectives and a lot of attitudes, it seemed. Existing research, like Dr. Landon did a excellent job about going over deficit-oriented models. So this study shifted why to why they leave to why they stay through an appreciative inquiry framework. So we use a strength-based methodology. We focused on what works, sustaining conditions, and organizational strengths, which we'll talk about the different states we got to talk to, but it was truly a privilege to meet people that were aligned with the mission for the organization and the purpose behind being a VR vocational working in the VR setting. But we shifted from deficit to possibility, or if it's not working, what actually is working, and what would you like to see more of? So in the methodology, why qualitative? Um, I need just a second here. So we needed a counselor's voice. Plain and simple. Why qualitative? Well, we wanted to get out and split forces. Uh, and I'd like to actually talk about Marissa Lockett, also that was helping do all the interviews, her connections to California. I was very grateful for Dr. Landon's connections to other states that I didn't know anyone, and then also be able to talk to people in Washington. All of those voices, I'm extremely grateful. And then, of course, Abby Beauregard coming in and kind of looking in with some fresh eyes, like, oh, did you guys look at this quote? Oh, I forgot about that quote. Having someone with a fresh perspective working on the team, uh, very valuable. So the existing literature, as we talked about, is largely quantitative. We're missing the meaning, we're missing the lived experience, we're missing the counselor voice, like I talked about, and then we needed a deeper understanding. The field needed, there was a gap that was needed to understand more of counselor identity, counselors' values, and counselors' workplace experience. I would also like to add that this is the biggest qualitative study for counselors. We were able to, and I'll talk about how many, but also this was the first one that's been published post-pandemic. So maybe some of them were generated during the pandemic, but this is the first one we were all the way out of the pandemic, all the way out of everyone sheltering in place and working from home. If any of you live in a liberal state like myself in the Pacific Northwest, people, and I will to go into this a little bit more, didn't exactly love coming back into the office. So this is one of the first studies where we're going to talk about why people stayed after all of the dust settled for that. So methods in recruitment. So what we did is we did a qualitative design utilizing appreciative inquiry and the thematic analysis framework from Braun and Clark, featured here in 2006. We did a very purposeful sampling to recruit information-rich participants employed in state VR agencies. And a lot of that was connection through my advisor, but also connection through my cohort and my program, people knowing people in the program that have stuck around that were agreed to talk to us. So we did the appreciative inquiry intentionally, um, and we moved the organizational inquiry from pathology towards possibility. Rather than centering dysfunction, appreciative inquiry asks what conditions help people thrive. So this framework aligned naturally with our retention-focused research questions. The recruitment occurred through state VR administrators, professional networks, and at agency email distribution. We conducted semi-structured Zoom interviews. And when I say Zoom interviews, semi-structured, yes, they were via Zoom. Yes, we sent the questions ahead of time, but if the counselors wanted to talk, we would let them talk uh, and listen and transcribe it. So that was an enriching experience. These interviews totaled 320 pages of transcripts and 1,050 minutes of recorded data. The average transcript was about 45.7 minutes, ranging from 23 to 75 minutes. I guess one of those 75 minutes was definitely one of mine. Um, so the inclusion criteria, so the participants had to be presently working in a state VR agency. They had to have at least 3 years of work experience. And like Dr. Landon revealed, that was kind of difficult because there was people that I knew that I definitely wanted to interview that had been there not even 2 years. And that they had no current intent to leave their employment with state VR, that they were planning to stay. Moving forward. So the final sample, like I said, was the largest of its kind. We were able to sample 23 vocational rehabilitation counselors, and that represented 8 of the US states. They had all different diverse tenure levels and multiple VR service models. For example, there was people that worked for the administration for the deaf and the blind. Some people worked in corrections and were out in the field all the time. It was very interesting, but all of uh, these inclusion criteria is applied to the sample. So our research questions were: what factors contribute to rehabilitation counselor retention to state VR settings? What do rehabilitation counselors describe sustaining conditions within the state VR setting? And like I said, we had 18 questions, but we didn't know what we were going to get back. And I didn't know who I was going to meet. So, how do they describe sustaining conditions within the state VR setting? And how do intrinsic and extrinsic factors interact in retention? So the research process, we did the recruitment, which was purposeful sampling of VR counselors, like I discussed, across multiple states who meet the inclusion criteria. Semi-structured interviews that I talked about already, independent review, and open coding. So this was really where the magic happened, essentially, is we had many meetings with the team, uh, Marissa Lockett, Dr. Landon, Abby Beauregard, and myself, and we met several times, really narrowing down the transcripts and the themes. We compared codes, we categorized them, and we clustered them into overarching themes. And we consistently got the group think on this. And if we didn't agree, we would talk about it until we agreed. And if we didn't agree and talk about it and agreed, and we still didn't agree, then we would go home and come back the next week and work on it again. So I thought that was, we did our due diligence in my theme to in my opinion, to really hone in on that theme development. Then, one of the first times I've done this in my doc program is making those thematic maps. So the themes were organized into thematic maps, illustrating relationships and patterns, and we're going to go into that next. And then lastly, the interpretation of these themes and maps to understand the retention factors and generate implications. And a lot of these that are in the manuscript for this publication were described in quotes, heartfelt, authentic quotes to anchor those themes and those interpretations to bring that central voice of the counselor into this study. So here is the conceptual model of the vocational rehabilitation, and I hope that this is visible for everyone. So first, there's the number one. If I could see you, I would say raise your hands what you think was the most important thing. But the most important thing was the professional identity and purpose, a sense of meaning, mission, and alignment with values. One of my favorite mentors at my vocational rehabilitation counseling office in Washington State, she said, vocational rehab is civil rights in action. And when she said that, the more that I've thought about it, it is. Every day you are advocating for someone. Every day you are bringing someone to an equal playing field. Every day you are triaging and pulling on resources and staffing cases with people that you share a mission alliance with for that purpose of serving our clients. The second theme that was the most heavily touched on was autonomy and flexibility. My counseling supervisor trusts me to do my job. My management or my supervisor doesn't even think twice about me going to an IEP meeting or uh, staffing a case or pretty much authorizing a purchase, uh, kind of giving you that autonomy and flexibility to do your job the way that we went to school to do our job. Okay. A lot of us, and we'll talk about it, didn't go into the world of vocational rehabilitation counseling. And I don't know if I'm the only one here that didn't do that, than to put a bunch of data in a software uh, interface and do case management and filing all day. That is not what I went to school for. So being able to have the autonomy and flexibility to have that work-life balance, but also to counsel and having the trust to counsel our clients. The third was the workplace culture and relationships. Absolutely huge, paramount theme across all the interviews. I'm not going to leave because I respect my manager so much. I love who I work with. We all share the same common uh, views on why we're here and our alliance with the counselor. So supportive teams, trust, collaboration, and a sense of belonging. The fourth theme, job stability and benefits, competitive compensation, benefits, and stability that contribute to security and satisfaction. The fourth was organizational systems and structures. Now we're getting a little cryptic, but efficient processes, resources, and infrastructure that facilitate quality service delivery so I can count on these amount of dollars to give to my client to get interview codes to interview for that job, and that's not changing. I can trust on that, and it's efficient, and I can count on that quality service delivery. And then lastly, the structural alignment and policy. So policies may shift. Washington, they were laying people off, especially at the higher up admin level. I don't know about the states that you guys hail from, but policies funding external systems, notwithstanding those shifts, there are people over my pay grade at the time that would call a meeting, listen to us, and really express our groupthink to their higher ups so that we could still do our jobs within reason, even though I don't know if all states have gone to order of selection, but shortly after I moved to Utah, Washington went to order of selection. And again, that created more strain that we'll talk about later. So I already talked about all of these, but I just wanted to go over them with a couple quotes. So theme number one, meaningful helping work, counselor identity, advocacy, orientation, sense of purpose, alignment with professional values. Some vocational rehabilitation counselors are people that live with disabilities. Some vocational rehabilitation counselors are those that were once clients, loved what their counselor did for them, and became a vocational rehab counselor, or are first or second degree separation from someone that lives with a disability. So that purpose. A quote that I'll pull from one of the interviews was, "This work feels like who I am. Even on the hard days, I still believe in what vocational rehabilitation is supposed to do for people." So counselors remained when they experienced strong alignment between personal identity and professional purpose. Theme 2, professional autonomy and flexibility. And that just seems so broad. So breaking it down, independence in counseling decisions, flexibility in workflow, being able to work from home in Washington State 2 days a week where you don't have as many interruptions. You can just knock out your paperwork, maybe do your interviews over Zoom or what have you. Ability to individualize services. I know in Washington State we have many Native American reservations all around, and being able to even work with those reservations and tribal stakeholders and providers was a joy. Trust from leadership. And again, I already touched on that, and professional discretion. A quote from one of the interviews: when I'm trusted to do my job and use my clinical judgment, I feel invested in staying. So, autonomy reinforces counselors' sense of competence, trust, and long-term investment in VR practice. Theme 3, we've got workplace culture and relationships, supportive coworkers, team cohesion, supervisory support, psychological safety, and a shared mission. A quote from the transcripts of the interviews: honestly, the people are a huge reason I stay. We support each other through difficult situations. Uh, Rational support within the workplace buffered stress and strengthened organizational commitment. I know at my office in Washington State, we all had lunch together in the lunchroom. I mean, not all the time, but we do puzzles. We would go to each other's functions. It became a family of people that knew each other even out in the community. When I could see someone in a grocery store or even see one of my clients at their job, a huge reason why I stayed, and be able to share that joy with my coworkers. The theme 4, organizational systems and structure, manageable systems, administrative efficiency, communication clarity, consistent expectations. Isn't it nice to walk into the office and know that you know how to do your job, know that you had the training, and if you don't have the training, can get the training and have the support to give the best service you can to your clients. And then lastly, organizational support. Another quote: I can handle hard work. What becomes exhausting is when systems make the work harder than it has to be. Uh, so the bottom line for this theme was that retention was strengthened when organizational systems supported rather than obstructed counseling practice. And then this is a shining, sterling example. I know some of you work with the Aware software, but in Washington, I won't even say its name. It came into play. They spent millions of dollars on it, and we're trying to implement it, and it just wasn't intuitive. It just wasn't working, and it was a hardship, and some people left. They didn't want to try to figure out a new computer system. Theme 5, job stability and benefits, retirement benefits, big. Health insurance. I think we had pensions in Washington State. That's probably federal. Pensions, how non-existent are they these days sometimes? Consistent employment, work-life balance, long-term security. The stability matters. I know what I'm walking into, and that consistency has value. Practical employment stability, especially when we have dependents, medical insurance, contributed to counselors' long-term commitment and sustainability. So, although counselors strongly emphasize meaning and identity, practical considerations still mattered. Participants discussed benefits, retirement systems, and employment stability as important sustaining conditions, particularly later in their careers. Let's see. And then structural alignment and policy. This is our last theme: policy congruence, alignment between values and systems, ethical practice support, reduce bureaucratic conflict. That was a hard one. And leadership responsiveness. So, direct quote: I stay when the system allows me to practice in ways that still feel ethical and client-centered. Uh, so with this one, misalignment between organizational systems and counselor values emerge as central tension influencing retention. The final theme tied many of the earlier findings together. Counselors remained when policies and systems aligned with their professional ethics and values. When systems consistently conflicted with those values, counselors described emotional exhaustion, frustration, and thoughts of leaving. This theme ultimately led us to what conceptualized as the central tension within VR retention. Let's see here. So the synthesis across prior research and present findings. Dr. Landon, how am I doing on time? And okay, so We've got prior research identified. We're just going to review burnout, bureaucracy, turnover intent. And then the present study identified meaning, identity, alignment, and autonomy. And I have to tell you, folks, it was refreshing to just be able to have this discourse with another professional that I barely knew. Some of them I knew from Washington, but it was like talking to someone that I already worked with in an office. I mean, there wasn't one thing where I thought, oh, that's kind of off. It was the reason they were there was the reason why I still wanted to be there, notwithstanding being in Utah for school. So the central tension, like I discussed, rehabilitation counselors stay employed in the state VR setting of who they are, professional identity, and what they value, the rehabilitation philosophy. But they remain only when the systems support these values. Now, I did know some people, like Dr. Landon expressed, that would leave because another federal agency, like for example, in Washington, we have DDA, paid a lot more, and they would leave to go do that. So even and then some people, like in Idaho, is like, I love what I get paid. I don't have a problem with the pay. So I think it had more, and our study drove home more of who they were, professional identity, and the rehabilitation philosophy. But they have to feel supported. If you come and you cannot do your job, or if it's a um, working with people with counterintuitive mission alignment, it's not enough reason to stay. So the implications to support autonomy, strengthen workplace culture, reduce policy burden, improve supervisory support. I don't know if anyone else in this lecture or uh, workshop has become a supervisor just because of maybe being there the longest. And I knew that my supervisor in Washington, our supervisor left and thought, oh, well, I'm the next one in line. I'm going to take the position so that I can keep this office in alignment with the mission. And also promote professional growth and align systems with counselor values. So bringing it all together, so from the prior research and the present study, we suggest that retention is not the absence of burnout. And I really feel like this is the heart of this study. Retention is not the absence of burnout, it's there, but rather it is the presence of aligned intrinsic motivation and supportive organizational conditions. Professional identity and personal values anchor retention, but systems sustain it or they don't. Misalignment predicts turnover. So we recommend our recommendations in this manuscript and actually in this publication that if I can share, just got submitted today, which makes it even, oh, I can't share that. Recommendations prioritize organizational alignment or over individual resilience, reduce administrative burden to preserve counselor identity, strengthen autonomy and flexibility, invest in relational workplace culture and supervision, and develop intentional recruitment pipelines. VR workforce sustainability efforts should focus not only on recruiting counselors into the profession, but on redesigning organizational systems that allow counselors to remain meaningfully engaged in client-centered work. And so summary, and then I'm going to kick it back to Dr. Landon, is retention is multidimensional, as shown through the multiple diagrams and thematic maps. Intrinsic and extrinsic interaction matters. Yes, things like pay and caseload size matter. When we talk to everyone doing these interviews, caseloads, everyone, they were over the 150 mark at some points. Sometimes, very few times, they were in the 80s, but mostly we all know that the caseload size really do matter. But the positive work environment, the supervision that enhances professional development, the professional development opportunities, and feeling valued, that's offered at little to no cost. Okay. And the appreciative inquiry provided a strength-based lens, and the findings support a system-level reform.
I know a lot of times people are always highlighting things like pay and caseload size, and as pointed out here, they do matter. But what I hope the take-home message is, I don't know if we have agency directors, supervisors, managers here today, but many of the solutions don't necessarily have a financial cost, at least in terms of implementation. How can we prioritize valuing the people that work for us? I think that's just a meaningful opportunity for an administrative team at a state agency to get together and really talk about how they're going to really sustain their workforce. What are we going to do to make sure that the folks that are here are supported and feel like there's not an adversarial role with the administrative office against the field offices? I know we used to joke when I worked in Idaho, the farther you were from Boise, the smaller the ripples. And there's a little bit measure of truth to that. The farther you are away from the administrative office, the less it feels like they're out to get you. But finding ways to engage with your workers, finding ways to help them feel valued, finding ways to help them to let them know that you value their work and that you see them for their work and the work and the valuable work that they're doing is important. Because we can maximize that idea of when we say, why are you here? And they talk about um, wanting to serve people with disabilities, loving to be able to put into a service, into a plan for employment that's tangible and pays for something. They can solve problems. Uh, these are things that make the state VR agency a very desirable place for many individuals. And we just need to be able to maximize that, talk about it with them, let them know that their work is valued and it's important and that we see them and the work that they're doing. Yes, we often find out pay is something, but um, people will take less pay if they find meaning in the work. I love the job that I do. Mitigate some of that pay a little bit. And those are things, again, as was mentioned, those types of investments in the workforce, those types of investments in the work setting often come at little to no cost. Am I helping the person grow and develop as a counselor? That's who they see themselves as in the role that they want to function in. What type of professional development opportunities are we providing as an agency to them? Uh, Focusing on clinical supervision over administrative supervision, helping them develop and enhance their ethical decision-making skills, their ability to use theory to case conceptualize and to solve problems. All of these things are wonderful. And if you have a happy workforce, then by extension, the service that they provide will be improved and you'll have clients that are satisfied and happier with the outcomes they're receiving as well. Mel?
Dr. Landon, did you want me to circle back to the previous slides that we glossed over, or shall I answer the question I see in the chat here?
Let's just go questions and answers.
Okay. Let's see. I see from Cindy Freeman, some state organizations do, I'm sorry, Cindy, do and some don't hire counselors for their specialty knowledge. Oh, interesting. Was there any discussion about being able to and to be consulted for a specialty or cultural knowledge? To me, that would help. Oh, that is such a good question, Cindy. Was there any discussion? I would love to get your contact email and then be able to elaborate on that a little bit, like to give you a really good quote, perhaps. But I don't know if that was talked about. Okay, so I'm going to say about this cultural knowledge. Yes, the person that I talked to in one of the states works with a specialty population, and that person has had the congruent disability that they've lived with that didn't necessarily make them an expert, but made them completely. I mean, I would understand a perfect fit for their job and their dependents um, were served also in the disability community. And I found that she was an advocate for other locations to hire people that were perfect fits as well. So, and I'm just thinking because we talk about this so much in the rehabilitation counseling and supervision department at USU. I would be surprised if people were not hired for their cultural knowledge and not hired for their cultural awareness and also to maintain that lack of assumption when there is a cultural identity as they conceptualize the case. But I would love to give you some more nuanced information regarding your very good question. Thank you, and please do feel free in the chat to elaborate if I can touch on anything. But I don't have any hard and fast information of why they were hired initially because of that specialty knowledge. But I can tell you, uh, Cindy, that people that were interviewed, the counselors that were interviewed, really wanted more training. And they felt appreciated when they were invested in to be given that training. And whether it's a motivational interview, uh, training, or if it's a cultural awareness training, anything like that, the more that they felt invested in that type of thing by their organization led them to feel like they were growing professionally and thereby staying as a result. Oh, Dana. Um, Dana, thank you. This is really helpful for counselor educators and supervisors. How do you think we could share these insights with students, new graduates, as they consider all of these concerns? Oh, Dana, that question cuts to the heart of me, because a large part, not a large part, but a factor and one of our questions in our qualitative interviews was recruitment. And if people that were going to school for their master's in rehabilitation counseling and supervision would know that there is a multicultural training. I know Dr. Landon, can you speak to, or is it part of the KCREP accreditation to have multicultural consideration class?
Certain elements of it, yeah, but I think the question here is really how do we make sure that folks know about the practice setting they're getting into? And some of that is practicum and internship, and we get to go through it and see what that's like. And other elements of it are just helping new graduates understand that especially when it comes to supervision, they can expect certain things. As a supervisee, I should be expecting certain things of my supervisor, and then helping them understand what that is and how they use that supervision to grow and develop as a professional counselor, a rehab counselor that happens to be working in a state VR setting. And so the other thing though too is, as like I said, we have those kind of infographics that we built. AI built them. We moderated that the prompt, but AI built them. And we're going to include that as part of our presentation. So you'll have some resources to kind of share. You can print those off. It's just a nice PDF and it kind of summarizes things. But if I was talking to a student, someone that's graduating, I would be saying, I really want you to consider, do they value the workers? And if they've been there for some internship hours, do you see how they value their workers? Do you see how they invest in their workforce? What are they doing to help you feel supported as a potential employee? These are questions I think we can give to supervisees, to our graduates, and say, hey, how are these things being addressed? And in so doing, I think we can help them prepare for that. And then Vicky has a good question. Do you see any support for the BR system for professional organization memberships? Now, I'll say historically and anecdotally, I have. When I worked for State VR from 2005 to 2012, we were provided a lot of support to go to professional development opportunities from professional associations. The National Rehab Association was relatively strong. And so we could use, excuse me, I didn't know my phone was on. I apologize. Um, I could use the state vehicle and I didn't have to take time off work to go to the annual conference for the National Rehab Association. There was direct withdrawal. It was just a monthly withdrawal from my pay to pay those membership dues, and it was part of the system. And I don't think those supports are in place anymore. So I think there can be a greater collaboration between professional associations and state agencies to really kind of build off of that idea and opportunity for professional development. State agencies might have limited resources. Some of those training grants that they typically went after have gone away, but they can leverage partnerships with ARCA, with other professional associations to really give those opportunities that I think the individuals are looking for. Mel?
Yes. Oh, no, I love that question, and thank you for putting that in the proper frame, Dr. Landon. Um, let's see. There was one by, um, I really liked the one by Dr. Christine about and it's, why did we choose the appreciative inquiry versus a phenomenological approach? And I mean, that's how I view that question, like being able to using the appreciative inquiry, what is that able to do that a phenomenological study could not capture? And that's a hard one for me because the appreciative inquiry, we were able to, like I said in the very beginning, I have to look back to this because there was one office that really didn't want to talk to me because they were losing a lot of people. And I'm just being completely transparent with you folks. And so having that appreciative inquiry and then being able to see those questions ahead of time, and even if they wanted to give us the questions back without even being interviewed, none of them did that. But uh, I think that I felt more of an alignment, a team kind of feeling. Dr. Landon, what would you say regarding the two different?
Yeah, in essence, there's a very, Dr. Sacco-Bene, there's a very overlapping synergy there. What's your phenomenological, what's your perspective on this? Now, the one thing that I feel like we tried to do more so than just a phenomenological approach would, as we would deliberate as a research team, oftentimes we would say, encounter each other. Is that a positive aspect of working there? Is that something that they're commenting on and is a reality of their work setting, which would be in line with the phenomenological approach? But if it was actually something that was negative in tone, we had to remove it. We couldn't include it because we wanted that appreciative inquiry approach. We wanted that idea of what's working, not what's wrong. Now, we didn't ask a question at the end of all of our individuals. Hey, we recognize this as a concern. Do you have anything to say that's maybe not positive in its approach? And so we still had room for that, just in case there was something we wanted to consider, but then it would be reframed in terms of, and what would you like to see different? How might that be improved? So that we could really try to stay focused on that idea of what's working and not, even though there might be a reality of what is, we could talk about what's working and what might be aspirational, what we would like to see. And I think that's kind of that distinction between a pure phenomenological approach and this one that tried to really focus that appreciative inquiry framework. And unfortunately, I think, Vicky, you're right. There's just some states that don't seem to support that idea of professional associations, and it's difficult. But I think we're at time. I don't know if we send it back to you, Christine, but
I appreciate it. I didn't see any other questions come up in the chat, so I was going to give you just a few moments. Thank you so much for your presentation. Great study, and loving that appreciative inquiry perspective. I'm a huge fan of that methodology and thinking about what is working right. And that really aligns beautifully with the rehabilitation philosophy. What's working well? What can we do more of? How can we access what is working well rather than focusing on the deficiencies? So I just want to thank you for bringing that to us today and wish you luck with ongoing research.
Thank you, Dr. Sacco-Bene.
You're welcome, Mel, and I appreciate you being here and sharing your research. Folks, thanks for coming, and we look forward to seeing you next week for our last three presentations for the Virtual Learning Institute. Have a wonderful long weekend.
thanks for having us.
Thank you, everyone.